I'm gonna, let's see. I'm gonna try to get started here. Trying to close my chat box. There it is. Love technology when it works. All right, I'm Susan Thomas, and I am a consultant for Family Connections, serving in the area of special education. I am a retired special education director. I currently work part-time with the Academic Alliance of South Carolina, which is a technical assistance provider operating out of the University of South Carolina. We work under the direction of Dr. Mitchell in providing evidence-based practices for students with disabilities and serving our districts. And of course, we have also have things for families. And we're always, I'm always thankful to be partnering with Family Connections. So we're going to get started talking about extended school year and what it is and how it gets determined or how it should get determined. And then some ideas. I've got a document that I will ask Megan to share with y'all just with some guiding questions. I think those are always good for IEP teams to have honest, open discussion. Extended school year, I'm just going to say right off the bat, as a former special ed director, really hard because teachers are done. They need a break finding staffing for extended school year. And then you're working around transportation and buildings. And so a lot of times it is complex for schools to and districts to figure out how to best do that and how to make it work for all involved. And we certainly have to partner together in that. And it's important for us to remember that. So we're going to talk a little bit about answer these questions about when, what, who, how, why, all those things. But I always like to start with the law. I always go to what our Individuals with Disabilities Education Act and what they say. We'll share this presentation with you. And when you get it, if you click right here, it'll actually take you to the law, a website with the law. And I'm not going to read this out loud, but this is what the law says about ESY. So it's not a lot. We have to ensure that we have it to provide a FAPE. I'm going to highlight some big points. It must be provided if the IEP team determines that it's appropriate and needed to ensure FAPE. You can't limit to a certain category of disability. So like you couldn't say, hey, we're only having an extended school year for children with autism. This goes across all of the 13 categories of disability. And we can't limit the type, amount, or duration of services. They have to be made on an individual basis. ESY, just by definition, it's beyond the normal school year. And it really has to align with the child's current IEP and what the child is working on. And we're going to talk a little bit about that. And by the way, if you have a question and you want to put it in the chat, Megan will kind of monitor the chat to make sure that we are seeing those questions. I certainly don't want to talk at you. Sometimes this gets to be like this a little bit. So what is it? It's special education and related services provided to a child with an IEP, not provided to students on 504s only. So, because this falls under that range of the IDEA. It is beyond the normal school year and it is free. And then there's this other line that says it must meet the standards of the state. That means the requirements that the state has in their regulations. We don't have a lot of regulations about ESY, additional regulations in our state regulations, but some states do. I was looking at some things out of Pennsylvania, and they have several additional things in their regulations about ESY. So who's eligible? All students with disabilities are eligible. That doesn't mean that they are going to receive ESY, but they're eligible for the discussion about whether ESY is needed. And why do we have it? Is to ensure that that child is receiving that free, appropriate public education. And that means that the child needs specially designed instruction or related services, and it must meet their unique needs. And we're going to talk a little bit about how you figure out those unique needs and what, ESY can look like. Well, when are decisions made? Well, it all depends really in the district. So districts a lot of times do IEPs on birth dates. Some of them have it from the day of initial placement, and that becomes the date, from here on after. And so, but we do know that we have to take a look at that at times during the year. It can be considered at the initial IEP or at an annual review. It can be done in a special review, but the team does have to decide. So how are decisions made? We make them based on the child's needs. And I think we have to, it's really hard because I think all of us would say, well, all kids need some services during the summer. I sort of agree with that, except for there's no lot, the funding has not really been made available for us to serve a lot of kids, not just kids with disabilities. And so we do have to look at those who need it, and it's appropriate to ensure a FAPE. And remember, you can't limit. So really a district can't say, we only give 4 hours. That's what you get. You have to make that decision based on the child's needs. That might be all the child needs. I mean, we've had a couple of students when I was still a director that their ESY was basically the week before school started. They came in for a transition day to help them get used to when they were transitioning to a new place. So their ESY was just 4 hours, but it was in one day. That's what the team decided. And we can't limit what we offer. That's the big thing. We only offer this for so long. We have guidance. Our State Department has a process guide. This is not a regulation, so it's not a law. It is just a guidance document for our districts. I do believe this is in the process of being updated, but this one is still on the website. And if you click here, it'll take you to the guidance. And if you go to page 92, it really does give a little bit of information about what to think about with ESY. And I want to talk about what ESY is not. It does not provide childcare. It's not a respite. And it's not an opportunity for acceleration. So if we have the child do this, they'll get better. They'll be better to start school. That's what ESY is not. So let's talk about how we make those decisions and who makes the decision. Well, certainly it is the student's IEP team. And that is, of course, parents always listed as the #1 member of the IEP team. That's in the law. Certainly, we have our LEA representatives. We have the student when appropriate, special ed providers, a person who can interpret evaluation results. Sometimes that's the school psychologist. Sometimes that might be the special ed teacher. And then others that have knowledge and expertise. We have regular ed teachers. We have transition. Remember, members can be excused with your permission. So sometimes we might excuse some team members when we're making those decisions about ESY if that's the purpose of the meeting. And because maybe they're not going to be involved at this point. So, and that's perfectly okay. We just have to make sure that we follow the laws about excusals of people from the IEP team. So here are the steps. I love steps for determining ESY. We always start with a data review, and we want to make sure we have the data there. We want to consider the needs of the student. We're going to talk a little bit more about some things to think about. And we want to determine the services that are needed, document it in the IEP and the ESY portion. I know our districts are really struggling in our state right now because we're getting a new IEP system. And so I believe in the month, there are going to be several weeks in late June, early July, where Enrich is going to go dark. So districts are scrambling. You may have heard about that. So that's just another anxiety builder for our district staff right now. But we do have a system to document that. And then as always, you need to be provided with prior written notice. And I do want to say, in some of the things that I've read, some of the court cases that I've looked at, we want to make sure that we are having these meetings to determine ESY in time for, if you have an issue, you have a time to use dispute resolution if you're in disagreement with what the district decides. So, and most of the time, you know, I don't like to go that avenue. I like to try to work things out. So here's some discussions that IEP teams should be having, and when they should be looking at ESY. If there is concern that regression will occur without ESY. Now, there's a difference, and we're going to talk about this a little bit more. We all regress when we don't do something, right? So I swim right now for exercise, and I was gone for a week and didn't get in the pool, went back. I regressed a bit, okay? So when we don't do something all the time, there's going to be some natural regressing. All children have that. All students have that. We have that in anything. We're talking about when it's so significant, when it's significant, and we'll go a little bit more into that. If the student is at a critical point of instruction, and I'll talk more about that, we want to think about the nature and severity of the child's disability and the need for continued services. And then if the services are crucial for the student's self-sufficiency, behavior support, or transition. Now, this is the guidance from our process guide from the state. And so I want to talk about these just a little bit more. I like Pennsylvania has a nice document, and I've given you the reference for that you can take a look at that kind of explains these in a little more detail. So when we have concern about regression, how do we think about that? Well, we don't just want to look at the current IEP, but we want to look at IEP progress on goals over multiple years. And so let's just say for a student who's not had ESY before, and we start looking at their progress scores on their goals, and we would have to not just look at goals, but their progress towards those goals, so progress reports. And we see that when we come back, there is significant loss that we don't recoup within, say, 4 weeks. That might be a time that we might want to talk about extended school year. All kids are going to have a bump down. In general ed kids, they're going to have a bump down. But if our data doesn't show, hey, we're able to pick that up and we see that pattern, that's a time for talk. If we look at progress after extended breaks, you know, we have some students that even after, you know, say the December holiday break, it's very hard when they come back for us to get them back on track. It takes weeks, not just a few days. That might be a time the team would have a discussion about that. And then we're going to look at if they've had ESY in the past, what was the impact? Did that make a difference? We're going to look at that data to see if it makes a difference. I want to be really clear that regression is based on data, not just on how we feel kids did. We want to have actual data to show that. And that's why it's so important for us to keep that data and keep using it to look at it, because we're going to make some decisions about that. Remembering we've talked about different kinds of IEP data in the past in some of our trainings, you know, that can be anything from teacher direct observation charts to, you know, using curriculum-based measurement, those types of things. So what do we mean by critical point of instruction? Well, when we're thinking about that, the team should be thinking about what are the discrete skills the student's working on. So this might be for a student, not just, a lot of times we think this is just functional skills, but it can also be a skill that, you know, is an academic skill. So like I might have a student, let's just suppose we have just gotten a student out on a job site. This is a high school student. They've been there 1 week. Just got them going. We're providing that transportation and a coach to get there. It could be that the team would determine that that student has not yet had enough repetition to maintain the learning they're having on that site. And so removing them could be a huge problem. And so they might determine that they are going to continue with some ESY services. And it might be that that would be a partnership with Voc Rehab. That could even be. Doesn't have to be, it's the law doesn't tell how it has to be provided. We just want to make sure we're covering it. And so I think that leads to that question down below. If you look at, I said examine current discrete skills, and then has the student had enough repetition to maintain the learning? So let's take an academic skill. The child's learning to read. They've got their letter sounds. We're just getting them going and blending those and reading and reading connected text. Oh, if we remove that support, could we get that student back on track quickly at the beginning of the year? That might be an example of a critical point of instruction. I'm not saying that, there's not, other things we could do, but the team has to have that discussion. Sometimes, and I think this is great for academic areas, the school is already doing things during the summer. They have reading camps and things, and those students can participate there. So they may not need ESY because that skill is going to be covered in another area. And so those are the things we would think about in critical point of instruction. The nature and severity of the disability. We don't have a lot of information on this, but we really want to examine the intensity of the current services. If we remove some of those services, is it really going to impact the child in having a significant loss in the skill? And so if that's the case, then the team needs to consider extended school year. We may look at some students with very intense needs. And one of the things that I think about sometimes is students that are, we're dealing with mental health issues. They have behavioral goals. They have the behavior intervention plan. They're getting mental health counseling through the school. If we remove that for the summer, would that cause the student to have a significant loss in the skill? And so those are discussions that we would want to have. That's an example. And then this last one talks about self-sufficiency, behavior, and transition. And this really gets us into thinking about what kinds of things do students need that if we, and if you look at this, it says, what are the skills the student needs to gain self-sufficiency or master appropriate behavior? What skills are we working on? Do those need to continue over the summer? Would the break cause such a cumulative loss of skills and result in the student withdrawing from the learning process and regressing to the point that we can't catch them up? And remember, we might go back and look at some of that regression data. That's where we would kind of connect back to that first point, actually. And would the break cause the student to be unable to transition effectively to the next level or program? And I gave you an example of that at the very beginning. We found a lot of our students needed some help during the summer with transitions. And so we did one of our schools came up with an idea, and we used part of this for extended school year, mission transition. And so this middle school had a time before school started. And students came for different amounts of time. Some kids came for one day, some did more than a day. It depended on the skills that they were working on. And so I want to say that it's fine for schools to have programs and do ESY during certain times, and meet the needs of the student that way. And sometimes that's more efficient for schools to do it that way. And they're able to staff that way. So those are kind of those 4 areas that we take a look at. And then once we've decided that, yes, we do think ESY is appropriate, then we have to make sure the services are fully described. And if a new goal is being developed, the new goal must be included. Now, most of the time when we see ESY, we're continuing working on a goal. And in fact, the reason we're there is because that student has regressed, or we've seen those signs. And so we want to make sure that that child is really attaining that goal. And then we want to describe the service. It can be specially designed instruction, or it could be a related service. We may determine through ESY that the student only needs the related service, because if they don't have that, they're not going to be able to fully access when they come back. And then frequency and duration of services and the start and end date. Those are the other pieces that we want to make sure that we have in place. And those have to be documented. And of course, then, as I said earlier, you get prior written notice on that. This is the reference I was talking about from the Patent Center, which is a Pennsylvania Training and Technical Assistance Network. It's got some nice ideas in there that I really like the way they organized them. I'm going to stop sharing because this is kind of short and sweet. I want to just bring up a couple of things that I hear sometimes out in the field. And, one of them is to remember that you, along with the district, have to come up with the times that will work for your child to get ESY. If they're eligible for ESY, you have to kind of determine that. Parents don't just get to dictate this time suits me, this time don't. We have to work together for that, because remember, districts have to get staff to staff during the summer. Just so you know, most of the time our teachers are not on contract for summer. So that we have to find people that are willing to come in and work. Same with related service providers. Also, it's really important for you to know as parents that if the school is offering a summer reading camp, or they have a summer school program, or any of those things, your child is eligible to attend those things. And sometimes, I'll just tell you, one of the things we did a lot of times is that our students did attend those summer programs because they were with their general education peers, which is what we want. And then we actually put some services in place to maintain some of their special ed, services. So there's a lot of ways you can do it. I've seen ESY done provided through another agency. You might work with Voc Rehab or something like that to make sure. The thing is, we want to facilitate what works for the child, and we want to be flexible about the way we do it. So I think that's important to remember. I see we got a couple of questions, or at least one in the chat. Somebody's asking about, can ABA be requested as part of ESY? Absolutely. That's a discussion that the team should have. And then you have to make that decision about how that's going to be done. What we don't have to do is we don't have to repeat the same amount of time. That's not required through the ESY. So the amount of time that a child might, let's just say, might be getting occupational therapy, we don't have to do that all during the summer for ESY, what's on the IEP. That's not a requirement. Same thing with ABA. So the team would have to determine what might be appropriate if they decided that that was what they wanted to do. But it's certainly appropriate to discuss it, always. We should discuss everything. Any other questions?
I had another question on there regarding if a school doesn't provide any summer programming at all, can it be discussed to contract with an outside district that maybe has?
The district is responsible for ensuring, if they decide ESY needs to be given, right? Yeah. Then the district would be responsible for either getting that service or making sure it's available, if that's what the team decides.
Is that also true for charter?
Yes. That would be true in the charter school
Yeah, I was just
district as
thinking,
well. Yeah.
he's currently in a charter. I was thinking, they don't have anything. They can't hire staff anyway for the school year. Is there any way they could use a local school district and pay them?
They can, there are a lot of options, and that can be done. A lot of people will use contractors and things like that. I mean, you hit the nail on the head. Staffing's really hard.
Yeah,
I think that's the battle. I feel so for districts now, and and I feel for families and districts and everybody because of the staffing shortages. It's really hard, but I
right.
think that's why we have to be creative. And so I know that in the district, I was the special ed director in Berkeley County, which is a very large district, and we actually did some of the extended school year for our neighboring smaller district. We actually took those kids in our program because we were running a program that was appropriate. Districts can be creative like that always. Any other questions? Well, I hope you find, I hope you find this information helpful. I always say I hope the resources will help you to kind of go back. I did create some guiding questions that you might think about if you're approaching this. And as always, if you need support, Family Connections is there for you. It's just an amazing resource that our families and our districts have. I mean, I don't know what I would have done without my parent partner there as a special ed director. So I wish you well. And if you have any questions, you can always email in and we'll be glad to get back with you with an answer if you have them later. Megan, I made it in under 30 minutes. What do you think?
That was fantastic. Thank you, Susan. I just will be sending an email momentarily with all the information that Susan mentioned, and would just ask that you give us your feedback on our survey evaluation that should pop up when you close out of the Zoom. So thank y'all so much for joining us today, and we hope you have a great rest of your week. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.
Thanks, y'all. Happy May.